hitting go live. And you are live.
Hello. Hello and welcome to Trudie Tea Time, as hosted by the fine folks of QuaranCon2022. I'm here with a good cup of tea to talk to you about my gaslamp fantasy, The 13th Hour, which was released on the 13th of October last year. I'm joined by a collection of my favourite indie books and a portrait of my dog, who I'm hoping is going to behave for the next 30 minutes or so. Yeah. So a little bit about me. I'm Trudie Skies, an endearingly British indie author, originally published with a small press. I'm now writing adult fantasy, but here is Sand Dancer, my first young adult fantasy, and Firewalker, the sequel. Lovely books. And here is The 13th Hour, which should hopefully not be mirrored, as designed by Bookfly Design and edited by Nia Quinn. I'm throwing their names out there because I love them very much, and I'm very excited to be working on a sequel with them. So The 13th Hour is my first self-published book. I'm currently working on the sequel. In my spare time, I like to procrastinate by playing video games and staring blankly at the computer monitor. If you're wondering why I haven't finished the sequel to this yet, it's because I haven't completed Elden Ring yet, basically. So then, The 13th Hour is the first book in the Cruel God series. It's a gaslamp fantasy inspired by Edwardian aesthetics and features magical portals, gothic cosmic deities, quaint Britishisms, Britishisms, and steampunk vibes. Now, this isn't your Regency fantasy with manners. The 13th Hour is full of swearing, misery, and other naughtiness. Now, I just like holding it. What makes this book, The 13th Hour, unique is the steam-powered city of Chime and the 12 racers who call it home. Chime is an hourglass-shaped city, and the two halves are held together by a gigantic clock tower with giant elevators that run up and down. This clock tower sits atop a magical portal known as the Gate, which connects Chime citizens to the 12 domains of the gods. And this, you can see it. Woo. This is a map and timetable of the 12 domains as designed by a legendary cartographer, Soraya Corcoran. Name drop it again, slight project placement. So as you can see from the map, each domain has its own time on the clock. So it's part map, part timetable, as I said before, and the gate cycles through these domains at the turn of the hour. So, if you want to cross through to a specific domain, then you have to be on time. If you miss your crossing, then you've got to wait another 12 hours. Tough. The domains are ruled by their own god, and the mortals are made in the god's image. For example, Eventide at 11 o'clock, this one here, is an autumnal-inspired domain with mushroom trees and a permanent dusk. It's home to Valeria, the god of dusk and shadow. Her mortals are known as the Vesper, a dark elf-inspired race who can summon and manipulate shadow. You can buy this, by the way. So, The 13th Hour follows the story of two characters, Kale, a Vesper from the Undercity who works for an organization of heathens who believe that the gods are cruel, hence the title. And this is Kale here. And this fellow is Quentin Corinth, also known as Quen, who is a diviner warden from Kronos, which is this domain at number 12. And Quen patrols the city of Chime to keep the streets free of sin and strife. Now, Kale, she's quite a playful character who is also completely scatterbrained, whilst Quen, he's more of a gentleman dork who can manipulate time. The two of them form an unlikely alliance when soul-sucking creatures made of Aether begin attacking Chime's citizens. So, to introduce you to Kale and Quen's world, I'm going to read out a short extract from the beginning of their chapters, starting with Kale. But if you have any questions about me or the book or what my favorite biscuit is, it's bourbon, then please put them in the chat and I'll try to answer them at the end. It's not tea, by the way, it's Pepsi. You shouldn't trust authors, they lie. Anyway, this is the hardback version of the book. You could probably kill a child with it. I wouldn't recommend it though. It's against the law. So going to start there with chapter 1. And here we go. Time had run away from me again, but I couldn't afford to let it escape, not today. It chastised me like an unruly student with every tick and tock. Even as a child, I could never be constrained by time, could never obey its laws or heed its lessons. Time had finally grown impatient with my attempts to catch up. I stumbled on my way to the giant elevator that would take me topside. The elevator only operated twice per hour, and we were late. I was late. That was a downside to a city run by divine beings who could manipulate time. Everything ran like clockwork. The printing presses, the stock markets, the trams, the elevator, everything but me. I can't believe we're chasing a tram, Drew whined as we scrambled for all we were worth over the train tracks, her breathing rasped between a sigh and a wheeze. We'll never make it. We will if you shut up and run, I spat. Of all the things I thought would go wrong, I never thought would miss the tram. Yes, you've mentioned that a few times already. Who even does that? Drew should know you better by now, my inner voice berated. Though if you left on time, you wouldn't be running through tunnels. Great. Not even my own mind would shut up about the pissing tram. Too many lives were depending on the documents hidden inside my satchel, which now slammed into my hip with each harried step. These documents were vital papers for refugees seeking a new home on Chime. Without these, they wouldn't be cleared to receive their passport and make the crossing. Then they'd be trapped inside my god's domain with no means of appeasing her greed. When one's god demanded such heavy tithes of her own mortals and punished those who couldn't afford to pay, the poorest had no choice but to run, to seek the only city where not even the gods could tread. And that's where my organization stepped in. Too many mortals came to Chime seeking a means to pay the tithe, and most were desperate enough to enter workhouses to scrape together what they could. But we knew a better way. Out of our God's sight, they were out of her mind and free from her whims. Not even the gods bothered to track their many thousands of mortals, leaving such tasks for the wardens, the gods' mortal eyes. With these documents, we'd forge new identities that not even the wardens could track. Then our refugees would be forgotten, but only if we smuggled them out before the next tithe count. We'd hurried to get these documents signed, stamped, and sealed, all fake, of course, but navigating Chime's bureaucratic system had rushed us to the last ticking second. And then I've gone and missed the bloody tram. So that was Kale's introduction from chapter 1. Now we're going to skip ahead to chapter 3, which is here. Chapter 3. And this is the introduction of Gentleman Quen. The tram was 13 seconds late. I snapped shut my fob watch and shoved it into my pocket as the tram pulled up smoothly, unaware of its own tardiness. Though likely the driver was a flustered mess. 13 seconds late? I'd be hanging myself from the beams. All right, Gwen, there's no need for such dramatics. I hopped into the carriage alongside a few other patrons, a Seren, 2 Glimmer, and found a spare seat near the window. At this time of night, the tram was almost full. Rapture's crossing would close soon, with Eventide due to open shortly, and that always attracted the drug peddlers. I leaned my arm against the back cushion and watched the tower blocks of home disappear in a slow rumble forward. I'd been a flustered mess all day, and the late tram was only one rung on the rope of a disorganized and frayed chaos. My entire routine had gone off track. I normally start the day like clockwork, a fresh cup of tea, 2 bourbon biscuits, the latest courier broadsheet, and the sight of obituary turning to rapture on the gate. But at 9 this morning, I'd find myself rushing for the undercity elevator. I not intended to spend the night underground, but that's where my visions took me. In my line of work, every ticking second mattered. I pulled the note from my pocket, 3:39, Lady May's Cafe, Central Station, Ember Mail. I'd already lost 1 mortal today. My nerves couldn't stand to lose another. The tram pulled into its next stop and more squeezed on, taking all available seats except for the one next to me. The carriage could only hold a maximum capacity of 80, yet we'd gone beyond that, with more struggling to keep balance as they stood. An entire section had been taken up by Umber and Leander alone. The heavy stone bodies of the Umber required some accommodation, though the Leander's muscular line form didn't need to take up an entire row of seats. They just like to spread their legs and flick their tail at any passerby. They deserved a tut at the very least. A Seren clung onto the centre pole. Her smaller body was more vulnerable when surrounded by so many taller mortals, and she constantly glanced over her shoulder to make sure her wings weren't brushing against anything. She could have used those wings to fly, rather than get the tram, but at almost 10 at night, the tram was a safer option. I patted the seat beside me. There's space! The Seren shot me a glare and turned away. Of course, no one would want to sit beside a diviner. If I so much as grazed my hand against hers, I'd see her entire past and future to come. Or so she believed. My domain perpetuated the stereotypes because they were an antisocial lot who thought making eye contact on public transport was the height of indecency. Saints forbid anyone would start a conversation. They'd be locked away for the good of society. Blast it, I liked conversing. The half-past bell snapped my attention to the window. Central Station, this is Central Station, announced the driver. The time is 9:30. This is your last call for Rapture. Eventide will open in 30 minutes. To repeat, this is your last call for Rapture. On cue, the tram's denizens rushed for the sliding doors and joined the central crowds. I shoved my hands into my pockets and followed at a brisk pace. Even this late at night, travellers passed through Central Station. The gate dominated Central Skyline, and Rapture's volcanic atmosphere cast an eerie red glow across the square. I'd never been fond of Rapture, and they weren't fond of me either. The Vida were banned from their gambling halls and casinos, so what else was there to do? As I made my way to the station, I noticed what the crowds likely didn't. There were more wardens on patrol. Their dark uniforms blended in with the crowds, but each of the station exits, even the emergency ones, had at least 2 wardens on watch. Security never needed to be this tight. What had I missed? And that was Gwen, who is probably my favorite character. You can learn more about them in the 13th hour, which is available on Amazon in paperback, hardcover, and ebook. It's also available on Kindle Unlimited. If you prefer audiobooks, however, then the audiobook version of the 13th hour will be coming soon as performed by R.J. Bailey, and he's a miracle worker. The sequel, The Children of Chaos, will also be releasing this summer after I've completed Elden Ring. And you can find me online at trudeskies.com and on Twitter under the same name. So we've got a bit of time left if anybody has any questions. People in the chat are commenting about bourbon biscuits because yes, they are the best. Although Kale, she's a custard cream fan. So I have a Discord server, and Tessa asked a question there, which was, how many books do you think the series will be? I'm planning for the 13th hour, or the Cruel Gods, there, to be 3 books long, so a nice happy trilogy. There probably will be more books written within this world because it is quite a world. So I'm planning there to be spin-offs featuring potentially a necro main character, spooky, and possibly more depending on like how we get on. I've also written a prequel novella based in Memoria, and that needs editing, but it will be coming out as soon as I finish the sequel, and that's Memoria there. It's the underwater city with the Amne. So that's in the books, or the works, one of the two. The work sells books if you're in the UK. Right, so question from the chat as well is, what is it that makes Quen your favorite? I think it's just because he's also endearingly British. He's 100% a gentleman dork. And he says that he doesn't like drama, but he himself embodies drama. And he's just a bit of a hopeless sap, to be honest. But he's also just adorable. I think everybody loves Quen really because he is a gentleman. So if there's no more questions, then I will wrap things up and say thank you for joining me, and thank you to QuaranCon for hosting me. This has been my first time doing anything like this ever, and it has been nerve-wracking and exciting. But please do enjoy the rest of QuaranCon. There's some excellent panels and workshops happening this weekend that you don't want to miss. You can find the full schedule on their website at QuaranCon2022.com. Oh, there's just one more last question from L.A. McRae, who is the writer of this book here, Summer Shelf. If you could pick one domain to have come from, which one would it be? I thought about this, and based on my incredibly lazy personality, I'm pretty sure I'm likely to be a mesmer from the domain of fantasy because all they do is nap and eat candy, and that sounds exactly like me, definitely. But creative types, authors, come from Arcadia. They're definitely down here. They're the artist authory types, so maybe I could be a Seren. On my website, actually, there is a quiz you can take, which will tell you what domain you are. So if you're curious about which of these domains you're from and which god you are enslaved under, then you can go to my website, which again, trudiskies.com. And on there, if you just follow the website, you can find the quiz, and that will tell you exactly which domain you are from. And if you're following my Twitter, I can tweet that out just after this. So again, thank you for joining me, and enjoy the rest of QuaranCon 2020.